A social worker has a client who was recently diagnosed with delusional disorder but is now on a stable medication regimen and have made good progress. The social worker discusses possible termination with the client. The client expresses that he often worries about his symptoms returning in the future at some point and does not wish to terminate services. The social worker's best suggestion to this client is, okay, first of all, we want to read all the answer choices because we want to know what's the best suggestion. So in order to figure that out, we need to read through the answer choices first. Option A, to terminate therapy and return when his symptoms return. B, to increase his medication dosage. C, to continue meeting with the social worker for supportive therapy. D, to avoid what triggers his delusions so that he does not have to worry about his symptoms reoccurring. Okay, so now we're going to go back into the scenario and see what's going on and what it is that we need the best suggestion for. So we have a client that was recently diagnosed with delusional disorder. He's now stable. He's on a stable medication regimen, and he has made good progress. The social worker discusses possible termination. Okay. The client expresses that he often worries about his symptoms returning in the future at some point and does not wish to terminate services. So what would be the best suggestion? So we're wanting to know what the best suggestion would be for that the social worker can give the client who does not wish to terminate services. Okay, so yes, we know that he's recently diagnosed with delusional disorder and all that stuff. So we know all that. That's good background information. But the meat of what we need to address is the fact that the client does not wish to terminate services because he worries about his symptoms returning. Okay, so what is the best suggestion? The social worker's best suggestion would be to terminate therapy and return when his symptoms return. Because the client will continue to struggle with this serious mental illness because delusional disorder is a serious mental illness, the social worker should respect the client's wish to remain in therapy, rather terminate the services. So we definitely do not want to suggest that he terminate therapy and return when his symptoms return. That would not be good therapeutic advice. B, would the social worker suggest that he increase his medication dosage? Well, first of all, the social worker is not the psychiatrist or is not the medical professional, so we don't give medical advice. So we definitely will eliminate that one without really entertaining it much. C, would the social worker suggest him to continue meeting with her for supportive therapy? I think that's something that's plausible, but let's see what option D is, because of course when you have these best questions, there will probably be more than one that's helpful, but you want to choose the best one for the client in that situation, according to that particular situation. Okay, so option D, would the social worker's best suggestion be to tell him to avoid what triggers his delusions so that he does not have to worry about his symptoms reoccurring? Well, apparently that is very unrealistic because it's not always possible to avoid triggers. So suggesting this would be setting up false expectations for the client. So we definitely don't want to just say, oh, just avoid your triggers and you'll be fine. You know, you can go ahead on and terminate therapy or whatever because, you know, just avoid what triggers your delusional behaviors. That's very unrealistic and it's not therapeutic at all. So that leaves us with the only answer that makes sense is basically to suggest that he continues to meet with her for supportive therapy. I mean, after all, he did say that he does not wish to terminate services. So that is something that the social worker should respect his wishes on. And for people with psychotic disorders, supportive therapy has been shown to be very effective. So in this situation, the client's symptoms are well controlled on medication, making it very likely that individual therapy will be greatly beneficial to him. So just to have that extra support will most likely keep him stable. So the best suggestion here would be to continue meeting with the social worker for supportive therapy. A social worker is seeing a client who increasingly becomes more agitated throughout the course of the session. Which of the following is the best action on the part of the social worker? So here's another best question, and just want to point out in the beginning that when you read through the answer choices, be sure to read them all, and there may be 1, 2, or 3 that may all seem helpful, but the idea here is to pull out what is best for the client at all times according to the scenario that is given. And this is a very brief one, basically just saying that the client, she has a client that becomes increasingly agitated throughout the course of the session. So just imagine yourself, put yourself as a social worker, and you're in a session with a client. You're trying to have a session, and the client becomes more agitated as the session goes on. So what would be your best course of action as the social worker in this situation? Would you confront the client about her attitude? Probably not. I don't even like the word confront or demand, especially in the role of a social worker, because we do confront certain issues, but usually when a client is already agitated and they're becoming more agitated, confronting them about their attitude will probably make that situation worse. So I think we would eliminate that one just on the basis of that. Would you acknowledge the client's emotions, assess her feelings, and discuss the client's perspective regarding the session? Sounds like something that you would do, but let's read the other options because there may be a better one. Would you enforce behavioral limits and structure for the interview session? Okay, well, doing this after the client has already become increasingly more agitated, that probably wouldn't be a good time to do that. I think that in the beginning is when we discuss, the structure for the session and behavioral limits and stuff. So at the point of a client becoming more agitated, for you to enforce, pay attention to these keywords, confront and enforce behaviors, we probably want to be a little bit careful with that. So we're not going to eliminate that one just yet. Let's just see what the other one is talking about. So option D, would you ignore the client's agitation and continue with the session? Well, how would you do that? Literally, if you were in a session with a client who was getting agitated with you, probably, maybe that agitation was being rude or disrespectful or nonchalant, whatever the case, would it be best, the best action, the most therapeutic action, would it be to ignore the client's agitation and continue the session? Like, I'm not sure how you could continue and have a productive session with a client whose agitation is increasing throughout the course of the session. So I definitely think we can eliminate that one. So that takes us back to the other two choices, whether or not we want to acknowledge the client's emotions, assess her feelings, and discuss her perspective regarding the session. Maybe talk about what it is about the session that's causing her to become more agitated. Or we can go ahead and enforce those behavioral limits and structure for the interview, like, hey, I'm not going to tolerate this. This is how the session goes. This is how it's supposed to go. That's what I would say enforcement behavior limits are and the structure for the session. I don't think that would be the best action, nor will it be the most therapeutic. So we will eliminate that one as well. In my opinion, when we attempt to ignore, hear, control, or suppress the client's expression of feelings, that is more likely to lead to increased agitation. So it'll probably just make things worse, make them more frustrated, or they could become hostile. And it could give the client the impression that the social worker is either insensitive to her feelings or avoidant of this type of intensity, like pretty much the social worker can't handle it, so she's going to avoid it. So we definitely don't want to give off that impression. So the best action on the part of the social worker would be to simply acknowledge the client's emotions, assess her feelings, and discuss her perspective regarding the session. Just try to find out what's going on with the client. Why is she having these emotions? Why is she having these feelings? What's going on with her that's causing her to be more agitated? This is the idea of therapeutic response, because you're dealing directly with the immediate situation and what the client is expressing at that time. Acknowledgement and open discussion of the client's experience is most likely to yield greater mutual respect, preserve rapport, and foster greater progress than it would if you were to just confront her about her attitude or enforce the behavioral limits or just simply ignore the client's feelings.